Today on Triumph Talks, we're back with Bailey Smith, best-selling author of Married to an Illusion. Have you ever wondered how someone can be officially diagnosed with narcissist personality disorder? Well, in Bailey's book, she shares what the American Psychological Association has created as the official guidelines for diagnosing someone by a psychologist with narcissist personality disorder. And so we're going to go through those guidelines today. And I encourage everybody who's watching to pay attention and grab a pen, take notes. Note taking is something we've kind of got away from with the ease of using our cell phones or our computers and Google to quickly gather information. But there's something about writing things down that helps you to really remember what you're learning. And it's just a list that you'll probably want to have on hand because even though you aren't a psychologist, it's still good for you to know what the guidelines are because ultimately, we are striving to protect ourselves from being abused by narcissists. So it's okay and probably very important for you to go ahead and use the same guidelines that psychologists are using. And so that's what makes the topic of today's show so important. Bailey, thank you so much for coming back and sharing your wisdom that's come from some of your hardest experiences in life.
And Melanie, thank you for having me. I'm really excited again to do another show with you. It's always it feels great when we get to go through the book and teach people and bring awareness to this topic.
Definitely. So, on today's topic, really probably one of the more important ones in some ways, because it really can be confusing to understand, am I dealing with an egotistical person or am I dealing with somebody who actually has a personality disorder? That's the big question I think that we all ask at some point in our lives when we have someone around us. And I was even thinking about it this morning. I have somebody that I've been talking to, and I find myself sometimes when they're prideful, just going, he's such a narcissist. And then I think, no, you got to be careful because I think sometimes we over label that. But at the same time, we don't want to do that because we want to be able to put the label where it belongs for the sake of protection. It's kind of like crying wolf, right? If we're always crying wolf, then when the real wolf is there, nobody's going to pay attention. So and this might be a bit of my opinion, but I think that it's true that if we're always using the term narcissist with anybody who's very egotistical or just
Pompous,
self-centered, right?
right?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this person that, and you don't need to know who it is because the point is that it's someone, and I thought a lot about it. I thought, no, he's definitely not someone with narcissist personality disorder, but I find him very insufferable. You know what I mean? Like, just like some people are definitely all arrows in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the actual guidelines that are found in the official Diagnosis and Statistics of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, that's used by psychologists in order to create diagnosis for different types of disorders. And we were just talking before we started filming the show. We're not really sure at what point specifically that narcissist personality disorder joined this manual, but it's fairly recent. And thankfully, it's something that we're looking at now as a real thing. So we have, from your book, you went ahead and outlined what their official symptoms are that are to be used. So we're going to go through that now. We'll start with the first one is something called grandiosity. So Bailey, do you want to kind of go into a little more detail about that one?
Yes. So narcissists have to always feel better than other people. They need to be treated in superior ways. And in my case, my narcissistic abuser always had to always bragged about the different things to make himself feel better and to make himself look better in others' eyes. If somebody had a lot of money and drove nice cars, he was driving nice cars. You know, always um, had to be better in many ways, or always, than a lot of people out there. If somebody had tickets to a ball game or a sports game, he had season tickets, and not to one, but to multiple. So it's on a very grand scale. That
Right, right. And I think that we'll find, I'm gonna bring up the next one, which is fantasies of power and importance. And as we go along, these are all, this is something we were also talking off camera, but all of these symptoms are very similar. They could almost be synonymous. But the reason why we're enumerating them and listing them is because that's what they've done in this official handbook. So fantasies of power and importance.
Yeah, so I would say that in my case, if it wasn't real, if there was something that wasn't legit, he created a fantasy about it. So he created a whole persona of being a hockey player, which I didn't even know about. Um, I mean, it's in my book. I mean, he had a whole social media page where he took on pictures of a hockey player that was out there who had the same name as him, and he told people that was him. So if it's not legit, then they'll create a fantasy. And I think I once mentioned this before on one of our shows, where his mother, and it's kind of funny because she did the same thing. She used to say, "Oh, fantasy world. He lives in a fantasy world." So,
Yeah.
those are some of the memories.
And I think, let me bring this in. I think too that as we look at these things, what's part of the actual disorder of the condition is that they create them and they believe them.
Yes.
It's almost, it's definitely psychosis when you create a fantasy or you think you're better than others and you really
Really
believe
believe
it,
it.
even though you
Yeah.
created it. And
Yeah.
that's where I think these guidelines are so important, because when you start seeing this kind of behavior and they really appear to buy into their story, that's a sign, that's a signal to you that you may be dealing with somebody who actually has a mental health condition called narcissist personality disorder. So the next
So
one
what
is,
they really do is they make something that's not real their reality, and they do it in a way where they truly believe it.
yeah, exactly. When we talked about it in a previous episode, how a lot of times these people come from childhoods where they were so abused, which is not always the case, but they had to originally create a fantasy, which would be this godlike person that could protect the very fragile, wounded child. So essentially, they began fantasizing in a way that they believed it because it was linked to their survival of the background that some of them come from. And so it's easy to kind of go, oh, there he goes making stuff up again. Well, that person may have been taught to make it up from a very, very early age in order to even stay alive, because I have seen so many situations where they truly had unbelievable, violent childhoods. Not always the case. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, go back and watch one of our earlier episodes where we talk about the origins of narcissism, the types of narcissism. But so the next one is needing continual admiration.
Um, so, you know, and we'll probably touch on this in some of the others, but um, you know, he, he would create like I said, different personas for himself, and um, you know, in order to have people like him or think he's, this wonderful, amazing person. So let's say he would want to make himself look like he's the best husband. He would be oh so wonderful to me in front of
Yeah.
people.
And
Um,
then would he expect you to express admiration to him for that?
of course,
Yeah.
of
And what would
course.
happen if you didn't? Was there a,
Um,
expectation?
you know, in the early days, I didn't realize. I Early on, I always would thank him or whatever. Later on, I realized it was more of you know an apology where nobody really knew what was but the behind the scenes. So it was in the front. He was trying to be this complimentive, but in the meantime, nobody knew what happened 2 hours earlier.
Yeah.
So in that case, no, it was like I would not play into it.
Right. But
But
he
also,
needed it. So when you
and
saw the need being created by,
yeah,
yeah.
but I didn't realize that this was abuse, and I didn't realize that this was not normal.
Yeah.
Do you
Which is
understand?
why you wrote your book and why we're creating this
Right.
show for your viewers to now. I hope you're all taking notes and write these terms down or these symptoms down, because when you see them collectively in a person, then that's your signal that you're probably dealing with somebody who's not well. Um,
And then another example here would be where he had to be the best father,
yeah.
and make himself, you know, they don't just need it from you or from other people. They need it from they need that fill from their children,
Yeah.
where they, create this this illusion of themselves, that they are the best everything. And that's child abuse, because you're pretending to be this amazing father, and loving father, and in the meantime, down the road, had no problem walking away from his children.
Yeah.
So
So then they start to feel entitled. This is the next point, to your admiration, or entitled to things that are not necessarily theirs, because they're so much better than everyone else.
yeah, and that's, that will cause a lot of friction, and a lot of um, um, and the next one is the explotive. Well, one feeds into the next. It will cause a lot of fighting, a lot of explosive behaviors. You know,
Mhm.
where
And
I did this.
exploitive too, being that they will exploit any opportunity to gain more for themselves. Like they're opportunists in a very selfish way.
Right,
Um,
right, and everybody around them needs to, you know, played their way.
at the same time, the next point being that they're unwilling to empathize. So they are expecting empathy, love, admiration, feelings of worth coming from you, but they are incapable of returning that.
You know, a lot of times we'd hear about somebody's that we knew, or that died, or somebody. My sister would always call me with something that happened in her neighborhood, or somebody that's not well. There was like, he's like, again, like, who cares? We don't know them, or like, how does that affect me?
Yeah,
You know, zero empathy, zero empathy. And
zero
later
empathy.
on down the road, um, if he would hurt my feelings or be cruel to me, and I would cry, um, he'd be like, "Oh, there you go again with the crocodile tears." exact words. Um, how do you watch someone cry and have no empathy?
Yeah.
You know, I was just a couple of hours ago in the library, and I was talking to a woman um, who had reached out to me. Everybody recognizes me from my hair. It's amazing because I don't always recognize them. Somebody connected us, um, and she's reached out to me a few times. And she came over to me, and you know, she was saying how I lost my train of thought. What was it? What were you saying before this?
Oh, well, we were just talking about how um, a
Oh,
narcissist's
so
trait is
yeah.
that they can't empathize. Yeah.
So, you know, she looked really sad, and I had just came from my rabbi's office, and I was talking about, you know, how it's just unfair, you know, um, divorced women in our communities just have no, we have a stigma. You know, there's more support to women that lose a spouse or to death, and more support um, versus women that are divorced. And I'm finding this in so much in the Jewish community.
Yeah. And
And
that's
that
I think that's a topic I think we should do a whole show about,
and
kind of
we
understand.
will. But
Yeah, to
I
circle
want
back
to
though to the unwilling to
this.
empathize,
And
um,
I this
it's
woman was so,
very abnormal to have no empathy
but
for
the,
somebody else,
and my
right?
point was with this woman, how she looked so sad,
Yeah,
and she was about to cry, and I gave her a hug. We're That's norm. That's the natural.
right.
That you, even though I understand how she's feeling right now, because I'm there many days. Um, Normal people have empathy.
Exactly.
That was my point. That's why this all came up.
Yeah. I think that, of all of the symptoms, that probably the biggest one that I would use to identify and get away from a person is if I'm observing that they, and it's interesting that the DSM-5 uses the word empathize, because I think I would probably say unwilling to empathize or sympathize, because there's a difference. Empathy, there's people that I say to you, like, for example, I've not been through what you have in terms of being married to a narcissist. So for me, I can sympathize with you. I can't empathize with you because I haven't experienced it myself. And that's the difference between those words. But that's
I
what's in the book.
I can
Mhm.
understand why they use that word,
Okay.
because empathy is, like I said, that's natural. You know, you don't. Not everybody will sympathize with other people,
Well,
but
the difference between the words, though, is a sympathy is where I haven't been through what you've been through, but I care and I have feelings for you, and I can connect with you because I've had other hard things, so I can sympathize with you. Whereas empathy is where I have been through exactly what you've been through, and so therefore I feel for you. Does that make
or
sense?
or you can look
Oh,
at it another way.
yeah.
You know, if somebody lacks emotion, and empathy is a very strong emotion.
Yeah.
It will show. If they lack emotion, they can pretty much charm their way through. But if
Yeah.
they lack empathy, they lack the most natural. Even if somebody hasn't been through what I've been through, or people that have abused people have been through, um, in any situation. Like, for example, if somebody dies, and you know, we know family of theirs, I I, I have empathy for them.
Yeah.
But if for a person to lack any emotion, and those, I think that is easier. Empathy in a, coming from a radiating off a person, or not at all, no emotion whatsoever, is easier to diagnose. That's
Maybe so. Yeah.
that's what I think.
I'm just I'm just putting it out there, though, for whoever writes that book. consider adding the word sympathy too, because I think if you see somebody, or for those who are listening, look, if you're watching this and you're writing notes and you're like, how do I spot somebody who's a narcissist and dangerous? I think it would be just as good to say, if they don't have any sympathy for anybody else, that falls in the same emotional health category as empathy, which is just to say, if they can't express concern for another person, if you don't see somebody empathizing or sympathizing with somebody who's going through a hard time, that to me is the biggest red flag that you should probably get away from that person.
Right.
Put a big star next to this one when
Yeah,
as you're
definitely,
watching this. Yeah.
definitely.
So the next one is intensely envious.
And you know, I saw this throughout my marriage. These behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody had more than him, bigger house, more money, fancier cars, it was handed to them. That was
Right.
his thing. I came from nothing. Look where I'm at. It was handed to them. So, you know, and that's the way all along my marriage. Nobody can be better or have more. And those are the people he didn't like.
Yeah. I
Those were
think
not the
too.
kind of people that he ever could associate with, unless he would find a way to make himself feel um, just as good as them in whatever way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I think too, when the concept of envy, a lot of really violent events, whether from an individual or even on a global scale, are stemming from envy. You see people who will shoot and kill somebody else, with that being the emotion that's driving them, and it's usually a very irrational envy, right? But so I think that's another big symptom. I can understand why it made the book, because as intensely, and that's a key word here, intensely envious. Envy is easy to have. So if you feel envy, that doesn't make you automatically having this disorder. Envy is very natural, unfortunately, that we all kind of have to overcome. But to be intensely envious, just makes somebody dangerous. Um, and then combining it with these other symptoms could potentially mean they have a personality disorder.
And then, and
Next.
there's
Mhm.
another factor that I would notice is somebody that had that he was envious of. He would put down. He would find out things about them
Yeah.
and their weaknesses or things they might have been hiding, um, or skeletons, and he would, find them. And we're talking about intensely envious because,
Yeah.
you know, so I have learned not to be envious of other people, because I have learned that there is no one that has a perfect life. You can, on the outside, look like everything's wonderful, but nothing. But it's a false. It's a false narrative.
Yeah.
And but uh, when they're intensely envious, to go to the extreme where they have to dig up dirt on someone, because nobody could be better.
Yeah. Nobody can be better, which is the next point, is they're very pompous, which is, again, a lot of these symptoms are so similar. Like I said, they could be synonymous as we see them. The first term was grandiose. Well, grandiose and pompous, there's a little bit of a difference in those terms, but they're very similar. So how would you cite the differences, for example, between something grandiose versus pompous?
So I would say that in a grandiose, it's more of like, on the outside, it's more of, um, you know, it's more materialism,
Right.
materialistic. And pompous, I would say, is more of the way they create their the way people view them or look at them, or um, they have to come across, you know, as, even if they come across as an ass or whatever, they
Mhm.
they're they're you know it's
They're
more,
okay with that.
yeah, it's more like a
Yeah.
personality, like more from a from the inside on how people perceive them.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like a spirit about them, kinda how they carry when I think of the word pompous, I envision somebody who's puffed up with their chest, and just how they carry themselves is a very, and maybe that's where that word could be used when when you're applying these symptoms to diagnosis, right? Is to be able to watch for how they carry themselves, as well as um, the ideas that they try to put out. What do you think?
yeah, for definitely, for sure.
Yeah. So those are the 9 official symptoms, and in your book, you listed a whole bunch more. I think you've
Mhm.
got like 24 other just warning signs. So those are the actual symptoms that are used to diagnose somebody. But there's a whole lot of other signs that somebody could use to help them spot someone who's got this personality disorder. Do you wanna just share a few of the ones that you came up with in addition?
So I would say majority, or many, have had past failed relationships. They will also blame it on those, blame the downfall on those other other uh, relationships. So in in my experience, my ex was married for a very short time, and had a child, um, and you know um, left left the relationship. He was young, and the child, um, and of course it was all her fault. You know, obviously, until I was my post separation, I couldn't. I always thought it was her fault. You know, so, but then I was able to see things very differently. You
Yeah.
know, I actually felt sorry for her.
So that's something to put on the list, and it sometimes it really is the other person's fault. So it's not
Well,
necessarily in and of itself, it's not a sign, but it's definitely a sign when you combine it with all of the other symptoms, then it starts to create a pattern. So what are some of the other signs that you might associate that one with to kind of help you say, okay, I see the reality of this person versus
well, they'll never
believing
take
them.
blame. They'll never take blame for
Mhm.
anything. It's always the other person's fault. Um, that was another thing. Any interaction that was negative with somebody was the other person's fault. Um, and I was able to see that in our relationship, um, more later on in our
Right.
marriage, and more when I learned more about narcissism in my post separation. Everything was my fault. Everything was my fault. I was the one that walked out, and I was the one that left my children. Um, but
And
that's
we until we can identify somebody as a narcissist, personality disordered person, at first, when you love them and if you've bought into their grandiosity and you've bought into their fantasies and you bought into the love bombing, then when they start to blame you, you at first take that blame and believe it and say, "Oh," especially I think people like like you and I and a lot of I'm sure most who are watching this, if you're an empathetic person, then we want to say, "Oh, what did I do? How can I fix myself so that I'm not hurting somebody else?" Right? So that becomes, I think, a source of power over us when they blame, blame, blame. And you take a whole lot of blame before you start to realize, that, oh, wait a minute, this is a pattern. And again, I think
And
that's why it's really good to go through all of these different symptoms, because by themselves, they may be not that abnormal, but collectively, they show us what kind of a monster you're dealing with. So, could you just kind of quickly, do you have the book in front of you? Do you want to just kind of list off some of the other symptoms so those who are watching can say, okay, when I see all of these things starting to happen, then I know that, all right, I'm going to stop accepting the blame and look at what reality is. So,
um, road rage. I actually did a clip once
mm-hmm,
on that I filmed myself after an experience on the road um, with someone who had road rage next to me, and I was so triggered, and I stopped and I pulled over and I did a little clip of what I just went through, and I actually got so many views. People related to that, but I lived with that, and once with one time with my father in the car, I, I can't even begin to tell you. My father was freaking out with kids in the car. Moody, which is part of the different personality disorders and the mood swings. Um, they are really immature. You know,
mm-hmm,
they're stuck at their trauma age. So if they never get help,
mm,
that's a very big problem. They put porn addiction, but I would say any addiction, any sort of extreme addiction. Um, they can't manage money properly, and that happened in my marriage. I had to be the money manager, which in the end it was in my favor, but it was very
wow,
frustrating.
yeah,
Um, and then there are also narcissists that will control the money. Uh, it's part of the coercive control. And then in post separation, so one, for example, a woman may have no access to funds, you know,
mm-hmm,
and when the divorce happens, it's a very dangerous thing. Um, and then there are also ones that have money and hide it. So that's also a really difficult situation. Memory issues, um, that's a big one. Um, they don't really have true friends. Everything's a facade, just like you being their true love, and them loving their children. They don't have the capacity to love. If you don't have the capacity to have empathy, you can't love. So these
right,
are just some of the 24 that we put down. You'll have to get a copy of the book
yeah,
um, to find out some more. But I think that these are very important signs, and I wish I would have known about it. You
yeah,
know, obviously, I wouldn't have done things differently. I did have my three beautiful boys, um, but it's we're we're lucky now in this day and age that there is a lot of information out there.
yeah, yeah. And that, I think, I really believe that this show is very important and should be very helpful to those who've watched it, because, like we've been saying, maybe one or two of these symptoms is not necessarily spelling out an actual disordered person. But when you start to see all of these symptoms or a large group of them, that needs to be a signal to you. And until we know what to look for, you have to start piecing it together very, very slowly until you get to the point where, and that's that, I know from your book, that's what happened to you. You were in the process of divorcing and in a support group before the the curtain finally came down and you realized that you were an abused woman and what had been going on. And so our hope is that we can help those who are watching to let that curtain down come down a whole lot faster, or maybe never get to the point where you have to go through the process of escaping a narcissist, which is, of course, some of the topics in future shows, and that's in your book. Because once you're closely tied to one, you just don't easily walk away. And so, hopefully, all of these symptoms will help you to not get so close to one that it becomes dangerous. Or if you are close to one, you at least know what you're dealing with. And I think that's a big step in the right direction towards stopping this kind of abuse, is being able to just officially recognize it, whether or not you're a psychologist. Any final thoughts,
Absolutely.
Bailey, before we say goodbye?
No, I think that people should take advantage of the knowledge and education that's out there, because so many of us didn't have it, and you're lucky. You're lucky to be able to have it out there. It's an official diagnosis, and many therapists have who did not know about it are now trained in it, or
Yeah.
taking special trainings
Yeah,
in
I would
certain
say people
circles.
like you and others who are out there speaking out because of your experience are every bit the expert that a university trained psychologist
Unfortunately,
is. Yeah.
yes.
So it's good to. So I'm going to bring up the cover of your book here as we part, just to kind of let people take a look at, in case this is the first show. If you happen to be watching this and you're like, what is this about? Bailey Smith is the best-selling author of Married to an Illusion, a survivor's guide to identifying and escaping narcissistic abuse. It made it to #1 hot new release on Amazon and has stayed in bestseller categories. This is available on Amazon and also on Kindle. And we just encourage you to keep watching. We are going through the book chapter by chapter, teaching the lessons in person that Bailey has written about. And there's a whole lot more in the book. And it really is a guide for anyone who may be dealing with this type of abuse. And we thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next show.